I bid you greetings. My name is Zenith. That is the name many call me by. They also call me Hero, the Hero, and the greatest of the great. For what I have done, many see me as a man beyond men. The year is 2871. It has been 20 years since I carried the scourge of all races, the abomination, to the planet Gale. And on that planet, as had been intended for so many years, its evil was purged and the universe became something of a paradise, though it was anything but before. Many died for this, many whom I knew, and many who died before I was ever born. There are some 25 races whom mankind is acquainted with, and perhaps more whom we do not yet know. But all of them, with hardly an exception, know of my name, Zenith. Perhaps they ought to. Maybe people need only a hero to bury the memory of all those who died with the abomination's destructive and horrific death wave. I assume that is why my name is sung in songs, told in tales, and played out to be something greater than it is, something larger than life. Just today, I passed by a teacher in the market square telling his students of my famous deeds. I do not fault them, but nor do I accept the praise all for myself, for it was not I alone who ended the war of 500,000 years, but many, so many, many people, men and women, fought great battles and wars against those villains who controlled and manipulated the abomination, those warlords, as they were called. Maybe I feel guilty that, though these heroes fought, suffered, and died for the same cause as I, their names have been all but erased from the book that is called history. Yes, maybe I do. Would you like to hear their story? Would you like to hear about the days of the creation of the abomination? Perhaps I could tell you also of the long reign of the warlords who controlled it, or perhaps of the despicable human warlord, or his just brother who hid the infernal thing for some 50,000 years from those who would use it for evil. Would you want to hear that? And hear these people's names? I think you would, as I too would like to tell this story, though admittedly I am anything but a perfectly accurate historian. Nevertheless, let us begin the tale. I, Zenith, relate to you the chronicles of and pertaining to the warlords. In a year without name or number, as it has been long forgotten from memory, there existed many races in the universe. These races were often barbaric, savage, and primitive. Violence was a trait which they almost all shared, and wars between them were frequent and frightening, often even resulting in the extinction of some. There was, however, one race who came as peacemakers. This race had no name, nor did any among them have an identity, but rather they all collectively identified as one body, yet it was a body without any identity. Do you find that explanation strange? Well, perhaps it is, but it does describe them as they were, I think. This body of peoples, formed of an odd energy substance, which usually takes a humanoid shape, came into the bloody universe with ships and fleets larger than ever an imagination had pictured before. Their fleets were seen in the sky by country folk and city dwellers, warriors and kings. And those who gazed upon their prestigious halls and stalwart designs stood aghast. Those who would fight them trembled in fear, and dared not raise up arms against their hundreds of thousands of vessels and their armies billions strong. This body of invaders did not come in war, though, as all others had, but rather to bring the universe security and peace. And so they did. Wherever their arm reached, they helped cultivate soil, plant the crops, build thriving economies for the savages, and so much more. For many years, this body of peoples ate it all and reached their mighty arm far out into the cosmos. Almost all became their subjects and benefited immeasurably under the peace and prosperity they granted to them. Life continued this way for very long, perhaps some 300,000 years, although that is not recorded. And many began to call the race of peacemakers the Mass, or just Mass, as they did nothing individual and would oftentimes bond with one another, such as in the event of creating offspring. These peacemakers accepted the name, and accepted their place of individuality in the universe. But the peace, sadly, did not last forever. Evil reared its hideous head in the strangest of ways. There was a man among the mass, if man is even the proper way to describe an individual amongst them, who, for his renowned intellect, was called Mas Altis. This man was considered to be among the most intelligent of beings ever born, and he made experiments with stars, planets, and even solar systems as though they were nothing more than mere toys in a workshop. Mas Altis took his experiments many steps further than even the most bold of beings dared, and created and destroyed things beyond what our minds could comprehend, I think. Those days I find hard to picture. Many among the collective of the mass grew worried that this individual's works were becoming frightfully dangerous and beyond anyone's ability to control were they ever to go awry. But Mas Altis disregarded these concerns every time, having imagined himself to be something greater than any other being, someone beyond ability to make a mistake. Yes, it is true, I regret to say. It is strange, is it not, that one among a race so deaf to individuality could become so bent on elevating himself above even his wise and learned fellows. But this Mas Altis did do so. And one day, all men from many generations onward paid the price for his ambitions. Mas Altis had said the universe was bleeding, dying slowly. Few believed him correct, but he pressed onward regardless with intent to find a way to restore balance to everything. All life, all light, all spirit. And in this thought he created what he thought to be the stellar, a life form created from the very substance which the mass were composed of. And with this creation he intended to restore the energy in the universe which had been drained by existence itself. But this stellar quickly became consumed by a living darkness which fed upon its own light and consumed it. This dark energy agent became known by all as the Abomination. The Abomination, with an inappeasable hungering for death and lack of substance, spread with horrible speed, swallowing whole worlds in just years and purging all life without relenting. Mas Altis believed the way to return this abomination to the stellar was to let it continue to feed until enough of the universe had been consumed where it might realize that it had to become the stellar again and bring light and life back. The rulers of the mass, horrified with his judgment, imprisoned him in what they called a passing sphere, a place of eternal thought without one's body, and began to develop a device which might consume this awful thing and at the very least contain it. The device, created by a mass who was called Cirrus, was known as Gale, the wind which would cleanse the universe of this consuming being. And it did consume the Abomination. I know that you are surprised by this, but yes, it did indeed consume the pestilence for some years, from probably the span of time between 600,000 years past to perhaps 450,000 years past. But in those days, Gale was not yet complete, you must understand. 20 years ago, it completed its 600,000 years task, but in those days, it could only suppress the black matter, unable to fully return it to the stellar. And at the end of this period of time on the planet Gale, the device which contained the Abomination, known as the Three Pieces, well, 4 actually, but that detail is irrelevant for now, was taken, stolen by a tribe of beings known as the Solferine, or Insight, as they titled themselves. The mass, ever the unsuspecting race, become careless in their guarding of it. These Insight men knew full well what it was they were stealing, you must understand. They did not take it believing it was something peaceful or tamed, but rather took it for the destructive power they knew it had. Their leader's name has been lost to memory, though it is quite possible he was a man named Vos Damder. But regardless, let me point out that he and his kind were indeed a very awful band of killers. This man took the title of Warlord for himself, and indeed he was that. Having found the abomination subject to him as it craved a guiding hand after having lost its fourth piece to the mass, this warlord turned his new superweapon against the mass, eradicating them at every turn. In those days, the Soltharian warlord possessed power immeasurable and used it on any who dared oppose him. The mass were hunted with a vengeance, though they had only ever been helpful towards the warlord's people, and were very shortly brought to near extinction by the fiend. The worlds the mass had owned were then given up to the Insight conquerors, and they ruled them with far less peaceful hands than their predecessors had. Enslavement was the new law, and all bowed the knee before the warlord, greatest among all beings. This warlord died, obviously. A successor, equally evil, succeeded him and continued his tyranny. After he died, another continued his reign, and then another, and another, on and on and on. Some inherited the three pieces of the abomination, others killed to take it. But all were evil, or so history says. If there was any just man among them, he must not have been allowed to do very much before his reign ended. They ruled unjustly in this way for probably some 300,000 or more years. It is a long time to be ruled by such tyranny. Many must have been slave races the whole while, a complete subject to the wishes and whims of their masters. I shudder to think of it, honestly. There were some peoples, though, that the warlord's reach never extended to, for the universe is a long, long place indeed, and even the most advanced of propulsion systems or wormholes cannot take one very far, very fast. This is significant, as one such race of undiscovered people played a very notable role, both in those days as well as in our days. I think you must know who it is I'm speaking of. Yes, humanity, and their home world Theo, or Earth, as it is now called. Earlier I told you in the first part of our story, almost all became subjects of the mass. Well, I spoke truth. There were some few whom the mass never reached. Two species, most notably, one breed of Soltharian, a race known simply as the Black Ones, and the race of the human, both originating from the planet Theo. Theo, the red giant, was a strange planet indeed, with its red desert surface nearly uninhabitable while its deep depths, accessible by 1 million or more cave systems, was wherein humanity and the Black Soltharian lived, but not peacefully. Oh no! Many wars were fought in the depths in those days. Often great rulers would arise, unite the two races, and subjugate vast gatherings of men beneath their feet. And please bear in mind that not all these great rulers were evil. Some were very just and good to those they governed, such as in the glorious days of the Ego SC age. Many, many thousands of years of peaceful prosperity and growth. But yes, there were rulers who were evil. One such ruler was Agir in Trebula, a Soltharian man who, along with his wicked half-human daughter, Leon in Trebula, usurped the Theo Emperor and took his throne with the help of his wretched servants, Eas Thero, Aegis Thero, Adian Eligard, and also Rage Metrolan, all humans. These beings were made immortal by embedding in themselves horrible implants of metal and machinery, both the humans as well as the Soltharian. Theo fell under their lordship then, and they ruled their mortal subjects with such unspeakable evil that few, even among the warlords, would be able to see their cruelty and not be horrified. Having ruled their own for a very long time, the servants of Agir and Trebula advanced into the galaxies around them in mighty warships and struck at many a neighboring planet. There were many victims who fell to their hideous power, among whom were the Mar, the Viozak Patron, and even another race of Soltharian, now extinct. One immortal man among them, known as Rage Metrolan, could stand their evil no longer, and left them to form a new tribe of men in Soltharian in a place far away where he hoped they would never find him. But, fearing that he might return with a force greater than their own, the Theoian murderers did find him, and slaughtered all his citizens without mercy. Rage Metrolan alone survived and was hunted for many years by the fiend Adian Eligard. Eventually, Metroland formed an alliance with a species of barely sentient beings known as the Yin by marrying their hive queen. Their offspring were atrocities known as Rageborn, a race with the appearance of humans, but with a hideous spirit inside them which would manifest itself as a violent, mindless predator. Rage Metroland repented of his actions and disappeared for some 50,000 or more years. Much more could be said of him, but for now we will continue with events that were most notable from history. During this time, the Feoian murderers had turned against each other, Eas Thero with his brother Aegis by his side against his master Agir and Trebla, and had wiped one another out down to so very few. Agir and Trebla survived this genocide somehow and, with his daughter Leon, fled into the faraway galaxy, while Eas and Aegis Thero returned to the planet Feo and stayed below its surface for what was probably 50,000 years. They sealed off the tunnels of the planet and enslaved their subjects under the most wicked of conditions all the while. Those years passed slowly for the oppressed men and women, I am certain. The hollows below the surface of Feo were dark, and the slavery was intense. Mankind has always called that time the Age of Extinction. As life became a burden, many of the slaves would probably have freed themselves of through suicide, were they not inhibited from so doing by terrible technological restraints their slave masters had invented. But thank goodness they did survive through those dark times, for they were eventually dug from their horrible imprisonment by a simple species who had taken over the planet's surface. One who had united under a foreign leader known as Shazo, a Rageborn man. You will remember I spoke of them earlier. Shazo had fled his own kind and had taken up refuge on Feo beneath its 3 yellow suns. He entered the depths with his minions and executed the 12 murderers who ruled humanity. From there he trained the survivors how to cope with the harsh, hot conditions of Feo's surface, and, it was said, he made them great. Many accounts have stated that every man on Feo at the time loved Shazo, who called himself Jaysirian, and that humanity knew much happiness in the days wherein he ruled them. They sealed the underground tunnels and never again returned to them. I am told some notable events happened to humanity during the next 20,000 years, but there are a few which I will relay here, save for the event where a man was seen among them preparing them for a great coming battle. This man was violent and found out to not even be human. Rather, he was an odd creature who seemed to be above the concepts of life, death, and living. Men called him the Ripper Man, as he killed in the shadows and in the dark of night to further his goals. Feo soon discovered what those goals were. A band of wandering warriors had ventured from far outside of any known territory and had come to Feo to destroy mankind, as was the wish of their leader, another strange being known as Tyranow. Like the Ripper Man in many ways, but greater than he. According to history, these two beings were both immortal and were somehow brothers, though in the oddest of ways. Feo was their battleground, and both were meant to lead armies against one another until one emerged the victor. The Ripper Man had tried and failed to bring humanity under his dominion. With Shazo's, Jaysirian's leadership, humanity fought back against Tyranow and his Eltisar minions. They prevailed and crippled the invaders' enormous vessel, the infamous Chorose, a weapon in the shape of a large glass moon. Tyranow was killed, and the battle was won. Though the Ripper Man disappeared with him, it was said that he as well as his brother would return to finish their war someday. People feared that day. Save for this event, humankind saw little of the universe beyond Feo for many hundreds of generations. They knew nothing of the great enslavement happening far beyond their world by the invincible Soltharian warlords, nor did they discover anything of it until, at one point, they collectively decided to expand from Feo into the galaxies around the Red World. Now, please note that Feo, Earth, was not in the Milky Way galaxy in those olden times as it is now. That happened later. They had probably colonized some 7 or so worlds beyond Feo before rumor of the Warlord's horrible domination reached their ears, but when it did, and they were made to understand that it was only a matter of so much time before they too were enslaved, mankind rallied together and began to work on a most ambitious project to fight back were the need to ever arise. They began to build a massive weapon with materials immeasurable around a body of a moon-sized dead asteroid. This weapon, known as the Cannon Star World, they called Autonolus. Autonomous was completed in 3,000 years of building, and the results could not have been more incredible. The weapon world could deliver a beam of crushing light across the entire length of the universe in the blink of an eye, using a method of laser beaming no race had ever conceived before that date. This beam could be fired again and again and was destructive beyond its builders' wildest imaginations. For those of you who have not heard of this incredible weapon in the hands of mankind, there is a good reason for that. Here I give you the brief story of Autonomous, the Cannon Star world. The Warlord's war had reached humanity as predicted, and the Warlord now holding the terrible abomination pieces was the fiend Agir in Trebla. Yes, the same man mentioned earlier. He and his daughter Leon, exiles from their home, had striven after the abomination for so many years upon joining their fellow Soltharine. Power had somehow fallen into their hands, and Agir was soon Warlord of the Universe. His daughter Leon, however, chose this opportunity to kill him, as she had always hated him, and allowed the pieces to fall into the hands of her husband, one Shoged-in-Ors, an animal of a Soltharine man. Leon and her warlord husband moved many forces into human-controlled territory and began assault on their many planets. Autonomous came to their fellows' aid. The Cannon Star world struck out against the hateful Insight armies and shattered their attacks at every front. The beam of light from somewhere in the infinite cosmos strikes us at every turn, Leon would say. Everywhere our foot travels, so too is the destructive light there to smite us down. Even their dreaded abomination could do nothing against a weapon they could not even discover. But victory was, nevertheless, won by the Insight within the space of just 1 year. Allow me to explain how. Autonomous, and namely its wicked ruler Arganazin, I believe his name was, had placed too much confidence in their power. Many had suggested they use Autonomous to find and strike down the Warlord and take his abomination, but Azin refused, believing Autonomous to be the new power in the universe, the abomination being now usurped. Instead of driving the Soltharine back while steadily destroying their millions of war vessels with ease, he incited them to draw near to Autonomous with the aim of defeating the Warlord in open combat and demonstrating to all peoples that he, Arganazin, prime advocate of the Cannon Star, was the new ruler of the universe. The man had gone insane with his lust for supremacy, and he paid the price for it. A fleet dispatched by the Warlord Shoged-in-Ors came to Autonomous in their full grandeur of some 100,000 inflict battleships. The greatest battle this universe has ever seen took place that day. The strong, sleep warships of Autonomous lashed out into the ranks of their enemy in an attempt to delay them long enough for the Cannon Star to dispatch them, and it almost worked. Soltharine Overlord Orson Canta lost perhaps 3/4 of his vessels, but those survivors overpowered the resistance and bombarded Autonomous. Within hours, the once devastating giant of war was a burning wreck of a planet. Autonomous was no more. By a strange twist of fate, though, that very day Shoged-in-Ors had been killed by a famous Autonomous attack ship known as the Chariot. The abomination was then without a master until another wretched villain from Feo's ancient past arrived to claim it. Eas Thero, an immortal cybernetic human with neither compassion nor mercy in his heart. Eas Thero unleashed the full fury of the abomination. But not on the Soltharine. No, rather on humankind, for having thwarted his evils many a time. Also, I ought to add that he targeted humanity for a second reason, because of the love his repentant brother Aegis had for them. He wished to punish Aegis for not having sided with him against mankind, and he would do so by wiping them all out. And he almost did. 9 of humanity's 10 worlds were consumed by the abomination in the following months, all with the exception of Feo. That planet he wished to kill slowly for what their forefathers had done to him. Zeluatrosa, himself a conceited and traitorous individual, led Feo against his armies of Soltharine warriors, but were soon overwhelmed. Events, however, unfolded in the most odd of ways that day. Eas Thero came personally to the throne seat of all Feo to kill Zeluatrosa with his own hands. But there he was met by Insight Queen Leon in Trebla, who had arrived in secret. In ancient days she had had power over her cybernetic human servants, and today Eas Thero felt that power coming back to life some 100,000 years later. Leon in Trebla ordered Eas Thero to destroy himself, and destroy himself he did. The abomination fell to whomever would claim it from the dust, but it refused to accept Leon as its new mistress on the mere fact that she was a female, and this near-animal device believed only males were worthy to possess it. It destroyed Leon and Trebla, and then fell into the hands of the Feo Emperor Zelu Atrosa. He turned it upon the Inside invaders and destroyed their mighty force of attackers from pole to pole of Feo. But the abomination was not a tool that could be used for good, and it demanded the deaths of humans to appease its hunger. Zelu granted its wish. Soon, fortunately, this madman was killed by the same human ship which had destroyed Shogun Inora's sometime prior, the Chariot. For the first time in known history, the 3 pieces of the infernal device then fell into just hands, the hands of the cybernetic warrior Aegis Thero. This repentant man refused to give the abomination its desire and took it with him far outside of any known recesses of the universe, and for perhaps 50,000 years he kept it from any who would use it for ill. This man was greater than I. The abomination must have fed itself upon his flesh the whole while, consuming his immortal body time and time and time again, killing him every time his invincible cybernetic skeleton revived him. It is a hard thought to imagine all the pain he must have suffered, but maybe he sought his reparation for all his previous crimes, and so he continued to endure till the end of his days. Without their warlord, the forces of the Inside soon collapsed in upon themselves through endless power struggles. Their reign of the universe was over for now. This was not the end of hardship for Feo and the last survivors of humankind, though. As he had left Feo, Aegis Thero had instructed his friend Chariot Captain Rhys Lenquaid to keep humanity safe. Lenquaid soon became their leader and made good on his promise. Over the course of some 60 years, he constructed what could be compared to a grave for the planet Feo on a long-abandoned gaseous giant known as Ion and Cyver. There Feo was moved and buried, and so remained there for unrecorded millennia, hidden and safe. Outside the bulk of Ion and Cyver, the other species of the cosmos forgot about humankind, forgot about Feo. Many even forgot about the abomination held captive by Aegis Thero and his wife, Ether. And though power struggles continued, they were less aggressive, less dominated. But a time came for Aegis when he began to die. Though built to be immortal like his brother had been, the toll placed upon him by the wicked bloodlust of the 3 pieces had proved greater than his ability to continue living. He realized slowly that another just man needed to be found who might continue his work and keep the abomination from those who would use it. With the help of his only surviving daughter, Ethiel, who had demanded from her father that he make her into an immortal cyborg like himself, Aegis looked long for one among the races who would be found worthy to accept such a weighty gift. Feo was gone, hidden from the universe, and so he had to make choice of another species. And, odd as it may seem, he made his choice of a man from the most unlikely of candidates, the Soltherine, who had been ravaged and depopulated so greatly by civil wars that their hearts were no more the cruel voids he had seen in ages prior. Aegis Thero gave the 3 pieces of the abomination to a humble young man by the name of Hyacinth in Collar. This well-grounded fellow kept it all his days, hidden from those who desired it. Hyacinth in Collar came to rule the realm of E-Ray eventually. Now E-Ray was the Soltharian homeland, and had been so for a very long time. After his death, his daughter ruled in his stead, and after her, her son, and after him his brother, all just rulers who furthered their peoples and spread peace and harmony to other worlds still deep in war. The Soltharine made recompense for so much misery they had cost the universe in those wonderful days. 41 generations of rulers, called Overseers of Atonement, passed in which the universe came to the Soltharine willingly, partaking of their goodwill. However, this did unfortunately create a reliance upon them among all species under their protectorate, and evil began to creep once again into the hierarchy in the personage of one Grafaz Collar, and his son Lam Collar after him. War and slavery once again crept into the cosmos. The Soltharine resumed their old name of Insight, and the Overseers of Atonement once again reverted to calling themselves Warlords. Within a short span of time, invasion resumed, and many billions were slaughtered during this show of force. The mass had returned from extinction following events I will perhaps relate to you at a later date. Their numbers were strong, and they resisted the Insight manfully, checking their numerous fleets many times while destroying abomination infections where they could. Work had resumed with utmost urgency on the cleansing world of Gale, which I spoke of much earlier. You will remember that. And the plan had been completed. It was now at last ready to fulfill the purpose for which it had been made so many thousands of years prior. But firstly, the mass would need to take the 3 abomination pieces to it, and there they might be purged. This task was no meager one, as you can imagine. But it was at this time that they decided to play what you might call an old card to achieve this. You see, there was a 4th piece of the abomination, and there always had been. Stellar Trait it was called, and unlike its 3 counterparts, this piece was actually less of an animal, and almost possessed a sort of strange goodness to it. It longed to be reunited with its brothers, as they did to it, but not for the same reasons as they. The 3 animal-like pieces only desired stellar traits so that they might be whole and entire, and no longer reliant upon a warlord to show them the way, but this 4th piece desired to rejoin them to fulfill its original purpose of rejuvenating the cosmos with light and life. It was not like them and feared that they would consume it were they ever to be reunited, so it had allowed the mass to take it away and hide it, and had been so hidden for all this time. The mass now wished to reclaim it and use it to help them overthrow the warlord Lam Collar and his murderous insight. But all records of where they had buried it had been long lost to the universe after their near extinction. But what had become of Feo, you might be asking? What of humanity? Well, it is unclear, really. Feo is no longer recognizable as the red desert world so famous from olden years, but was now a thriving green and blue world rich in minerals and populated quite substantially. Somehow, in a lost period of time, it had left Iron and Sciver, now known as the orange planet Jupiter, and had assumed a position in the Milky Way galaxy around a lone white star. We called it Earth now, and we had quite forgotten our place in the universe. But the universe had not forgotten us. A band of raiders known as the Thule-Jah came to Earth in mighty space vessels and kidnapped many a man and woman from cities in a continent called North America, I believe it was. Do correct me if I am mistaken. They bonded these humans with a species of symbionts known as journeyers, with the purpose of connecting their minds on a greater level of existence with both the abomination as well as stellar trait, whom they wished to have for themselves so that they might destroy their slave masters, the Insight. I am something like the journeyers. I bonded with one of them when I was just a teen, as do many of us in these times. A journeyer is not evil and grants one many incredible gifts, including a greater vision of our existence, but I digress from the tale. The purpose of these Thule-Jah was nothing just, you must understand. No, rather the opposite. The Thule-Jah, or Vex as they were called by many, were hideous monsters who were just as hateful as their masters. They bonded their human prisoners with journeyers so that they might find stellar trait, and then they would be killed as the Vex seized their new superweapon and turned it on all other species. This plan proved to be perfect. Having allowed one of these humans to escape to the mass, one who was known as Fulcrum, they followed him as he used his vision of stellar trait to track the 4th piece down, and then they took it for themselves. But fate dealt them a heavy blow that day. The innumerable fleets of the Warlord came upon them in a full force, along with the full might of the abomination. Lam Collar wiped them out and took the 4th piece with him, back to an enormous station called Cosmos Salis, which he had created for the purpose of doing exactly what both the abomination and stellar trait had always instinctively craved to do: cleanse the universe. Lam Collar was mad and believed that their cleansing would create a new universe, one that he alone would become the master of. And then let the cleansing so begin, he said to his followers, on this day, on this last day of all existence. Fulcrum and the mass, along with those humans who had become involved in this terrible ordeal, rushed to Cosmos Salis to stop him, and with the aid of the 2 Soltharian defectors, Sar Neris and Malus Eard, they halted his mad schemes only moments before all life would cease to exist. Yes, according to every account, it was as desperate an ordeal as all that. Fulcrum, as well as many millions of other warriors, perished that day. So too did the 4th piece of the abomination, stellar trait, who was now almost consumed by its 3 brothers. With its last breath, it drove itself into them full force in a move they had not anticipated. The impact heard and felt all throughout the cosmos split the surviving three apart and shattered their power, rendering them helpless for so long of a time. Malice-eared, a good-hearted but foolish soul-therine man, took the three pieces and hid them in separate places of the universe. This was not the will of the mass, who desired to return them to Gale to cleanse their evil urge from them, but nevertheless this was done by him, and no one heard of the pieces again for approximately 850 years. Earth was one of the places where one piece was hidden, as most of you know. The landmass of Earth sunk beneath the waves to conceal it in the year 2300. Mankind there, unsuspecting this, and with no knowledge of any existence outside of Earth, turned to the cosmos in search of another world. They came to the planet Yarnon in the year 2500 after 200 years adrift in space, and many made their abode on that fertile world. Others took up residence elsewhere, and soon they were well acquainted with the mass and all other species which their forefathers had forgotten of. Strangely, and perhaps sadly, none remained of those humans who had fought Lom Collar 500 years prior. Some say they died through infighting, while others say they were wiped out by the Thula-Jah, who were rising in power. I hope for the latter to have been true, as do we all. But the humans of Yarnon soon became a great civilization among the other races, and were a chief ally of the mass as they fought to suppress a Thula-Jah man who called himself the next Warlord. USI was his name. Many had flocked to his unrivaled charisma, and after he had hunted down and wiped out almost every soul-therine being left in the universe, his band soon grew to become quite out of hand, double again when they discovered one of the three lost pieces of the abomination. This did not give them ultimate power, though, as one piece alone was hardly enough to even summon the horrible Black Plague upon the enemies of USI. He therefore began a search for the others, and through his genius discovered the locations of both objects. It was a race against time then to stop him from acquiring them. I was present when our forces, along with the mass, stormed the world of Viozek and fought with fortitude and resilience against the Thula-Jah as they unearthed it from its imprisonment. My friend, also a half-journeyer named Spectre, took the piece from the hands of a powerful overlord of USI, and we returned it to its final resting place on Gale, where we hoped all three pieces would soon rest forevermore. USI and his armies now made for Earth to acquire the last piece. I also saw the events which transpired there, but the Fiend acquired the piece nonetheless and joined it with the other piece he had acquired earlier. Many of our ships fell before his vessel, the Black Wave, but so too did he lose many a follower. Some perished while others defected to us. USI was desperate and challenged me, one he deemed to be the ultimate warrior of humankind, to a duel. I had faced him once before in a peaceful arena, in those days when there was peace between our nations, and he was just as strong now as he had been then. The giant nearly bested me so many times, but thankfully I felled him at last, and the last two pieces of the abomination fell into my hands and would only serve me. I remember their pathetic squeals when I took them back to Gale to reunite them with the other piece and then cleanse them of their evil. They howled at me, and it carried down to my core. It was as though every fiber of my being had become like them, and I did falter in my steps that day. I did wish to use them for the same evil as so many of their previous masters had, but by a strength I know not, I was able to endure their assaults and continue this last journey. They rebelled against me. Was that the first time ever recorded that they had done that to their master? I believe it was. The two pieces fought me with a fury when we came to Gale, and they ravaged our numbers. They infested Gale and created towering beasts of their energy to stop our efforts. It was only through the heroism of many of my fellows that I was able to push through these monstrosities and enter the passageway which led to the center of the planet, wherein was the first piece. The abomination had perhaps little more intelligence than an animal, but even an animal will fight to preserve its existence. I remember being half dead with the strain it assailed me with by the time we had reached the center of Gale. Spectre, ever at my side, fell in the last moments. Forgive me. His mind was connected to mine, you see, as journeyers have a sort of telepathy and they share it with their hosts. He was always strong when I was weak and saw me through every painful step of the way. He was one of those heroes I speak of. Somehow, I wish it had been him and not me here relaying this story to you today. Well, I placed the abomination in its prison and activated Gale. As it was cleansed of all its ills, the universe was cleansed in like manner of so many of its own. Disease, war, famine, hatred, pain. All was made better. Perhaps I will say the maker of the abomination was right in a way. When cleansed, this horror, which was called by many the most feared, did in fact do as he had said it would. No, I do not agree with this method of simply unleashing it into the universe without even a sense of caution, but perhaps it was, by a strange twist of fortune, a good thing in the end. For many great men and women rose above the mire throughout the long history of our universe. There were most certainly good, just, and honorable names who rose to combat this great evil. And we, the survivors and beneficiaries, are forever in their debt. As I end this incredible retelling of events, perhaps, though it would seem not fitting, I will leave you with a thought that has just now occurred to me. As this began with one whose name, Altis, meant highest, so too did it end with I, Zenith, whose name means the same. Though I do not deserve this honor, nevertheless it was given me, and I hope, through my relaying of all that came before me, that this honor may be dispersed among all those men and women who deserve that same honor. May you all be at peace. If you wish to know more of the events I've described here, or more detail of them, or perhaps of an event I have left out, feel at ease in letting me know, and I will accommodate you in shortest possible order. Until then, I bid you a fond farewell.